We're live.
Hello, world.
Hi, everybody.
We made it.
Welcome to the Roastery. Welcome to Mill City Roasters. I'm Lauren.
I'm Bryant.
Good to see you all. If you're watching this live, welcome. Feel free to throw questions at us. If you're cupping with us, that's awesome. Let us know what you're tasting. We're tasting today, of course, our Peru Brew Box.
Peru Brew Box.
We keep calling it the Brew Box because it's hard to say. But we're also just going to generally be talking about cupping, about QC programs, about staying sharp, keeping your sensory skills sharp. So if you're watching this after July 18th, 2023, there will still be plenty of knowledge, hopefully, to glean.
Always.
Yeah. So, Brian, what do you want to tell us about these coffees and why they ended up in this sensory training box?
Yeah, well, I mean, if anybody knows me, they know I have a very soft spot in my heart for coffees from Peru.
Yes.
One of my favorites.
Yeah.
These are all from the northern region of Peru, primarily Cajamarca and the Amazonas region. We have one regional blend offering that is from the Cajamarca region, which would be
this one.
Yeah,
Yes.
the Lima Women Producers, part of the Women Producers Project from Cafe Imports. And as a regional blend of coffee, it's just, kind of, what best represents the region of Cajamarca for coffee. Very lovely. And then our next two coffees come from, how are they?
Yeah.
Terroir.
Yeah.
Terroir Guevan Fernandez and Luis Anguspilco Inga come from Red Fox Coffee Merchants, which is more honed in on two single producers in the Amazonas region. As part of a project that is to kind of like conserve the rainforest.
Cool.
And like really sustainable practices for growing, and very, very small batch processing per day, very unique. And then the last coffee that we have is a mountain water process decaf.
My favorite.
Because decaf is incredible.
Yeah, decaf is delicious.
Yeah, and they're so diverse, and it just really highlights it still maintains a huge taste of place, like from Peru, and while just being delicious for an all-day drinker.
Yeah. So if you've had brew boxes from us before, you know that we always try to teach something with this collection of coffees. Sometimes we're teaching about the impact of roast. Yeah. Sometimes we're teaching about the impact of processing method. Today is just one of those explorations. So like exploring a country through a few different cups of coffee. We know that, regionality, origin, terroir really plays such a big role in how coffee will end up tasting. And I think early on in our coffee careers, it's easy to say, oh yeah, Peru is really distinct. Peru is going to be its own flavor, relative to or compared to Colombia or compared to Brazil. But, remembering too that within this country, we have an enormous variety of origins and sort of smaller regions.
It's a huge
country.
It's
like, it's fun to like explore within. I remember the very first time I got to do a cupping like this was like cupping 6 coffees from Guatemala and from a lot of really distinctly different reasons. And that was like a really big like light bulb moment for me because I had a generalization in my mind of what coffee from Guatemala tasted like. Yeah. And then it like destroyed that for me.
Of course it did.
Yeah.
My first time was Caravella did like a fermentation.
Oh yeah.
Through like wash coffee and like aerobic, anaerobic, but just kind of like experimenting what it does across like 20 different lots
from
Colombia.
From Colombia.
Yeah, it was like one region, Colombia, wash lots, different processing. Yeah,
you get really cocky in your like sophomore year of being a coffee professional, like barista, where you're like, oh, I can tell you what something's from based on taste. Yeah. And then you do something like that, you're like, oh, I never could do that. That's impossible.
Throw out the salt.
So if you do pick up the brew box, I think we're getting towards the end of this one being available.
Yes, I think the last roast date was actually last week.
Yeah, so people joining this cupping might have this with us, might have this last roast date with us. But we always ship a little bit of information about the coffees. For this one, it was a little bit about the regions, about the farms or the single estates, and then like the that bigger blend. Yeah. And on our website, if you go to the Brew Box product page, you'll be able to click through and see the roast profiles for these coffees because obviously that's kind of our bread and butter. Bryant's a great coffee buyer, but really what we do here is focus on roasting and roast craft. Yeah. So maybe we should let's do our first step and then we'll talk a little bit about how these are roasted.
Sounds great.
So the first step of the cupping always is going to be dry fragrance. We're going to smell these grounds. And the only thing that we're going to do different today than we would from our normal kind of regular QC cupping is we're just going to be talking as we experience these fragrances, flavors, and aromas. Normally, we wouldn't want to influence each other or influence you all, but we do want to share our observations so that we can kind of calibrate in the moment and sort of know what we're looking for in the cup.
I get like chocolatey and like red apple like
Yeah.
right off the bat.
Yeah, chocolate, red fruit, like a little orange oil on that regional blend.
Mm-hmm.
This first single estate is also chocolate, but more like single origin, like dark chocolate and kind of malty.
Yeah, it has like
We've already got.
Oh yeah,
browns.
and
yeah.
you too on chin and the nose
Yeah.
all over. Kind of like a dried figginess about it too, or like a raisin.
Yeah, I get that like dehydrated fruit. Going more like almond, like really round, a little bit more earthy on this cup.
Yeah, I was also kind of getting like orange gummy like candy, or like a dried apricot kind of thing.
Yeah.
Something that's just like orange and chewy.
I mean, peaches, peach extract and like almond extract are so close to each other in terms of like smell that, I can see that.
I kind of like that almond too. Kind of almost has that like cherryness about it too.
Yeah.
Kind of reminds me of like a turtle brownie.
I was gonna say like trail mix, like it's like chocolate chips and walnuts and like pecans and cashews and stuff. It's just like a big like mixed bag of chocolate and nuts.
Love it.
Yeah, that was the decaf. So we're gonna go ahead and start brewing these coffees. We've each got our own carafe of hot water. You have a timer? I'll use mine.
Okay.
3, 2, 1. And while we're doing this, maybe Bryant can multitask and tell us a little bit about how these coffees are roasted, because these all look, at least to like the naked eye, like pretty close in roast level.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everything here is between kind of like a light to medium roast level, with either a more developed light or like the light end of medium. Mostly just to preserve a lot of that origin characteristic, but not err on the side of, kind of underdeveloped or herbaceous or...
Yeah, kind of that sample roast flavor.
Yeah, where it just kind of gets a little too tart, like in the cool cup. So these are all taken to about that roast level. The regional blend, because it's, an amalgam of so many coffees, it almost acts as like a blend in itself, where we talk about like roasting a pre-blend. So a little bit of a longer
slowing it down
roast. The two estates and the single producers push a little faster with only a few different varietals, maybe, and I think one of them also only has one varietal in there as well. But those can be pushed a little bit faster because you don't have so many different sizes of seeds going on in the roast, but also still highlighting characteristic of, I guess more so varietal characteristics, since we're separating that out a bit. And kind of that Amazonas region as well. With the Terroir going a little bit deeper into like more of those kind of like deeper caramel brown sugar notes, and Luis going a little bit on the lighter side, only by about like 4 to 5 degrees though, not much.
The decaf, I was going to say, regardless of finish temp, it will probably look a little darker.
Yes.
Decaf always looks a little darker than it is, which is why it's a little bit hard to roast.
My first time ever roasting like not a decaf, but the story of roasting decaf is that it looked like it was like burnt when it came out of the roaster. And my green buyer at the time that I was working with was like, "What did you do to this coffee?" And I was like, "I don't know. It's the same temperature." Baby Bryant roaster. And then we cupped it out and it was like delicious.
It was okay. really classic Peru, that first like pass for the aroma. It's kind of raisiny. It's very like milk chocolate. It's very like Hershey's chocolate, which is like very generic chocolate, but very nice.
Kind of reminds me of like the M&M, like the shell of an M&M.
Yeah.
Gives it that kind of flavor.
Yeah.
Like Halloween candy.
Yeah. Wow, more complex with a single state. That one's kind of floral.
Yeah, there is kind of like a coating note. There is kind of this like toasted like herb as well. It's like a little deeper.
Yeah.
Not like a grassy herbaceous, but kind of like a, I don't know, like a cooked sage or kind of thymy or something like that.
Yeah.
I have a question from the chat.
What's up?
Questions?
What do you believe to be the greater determinant of flavor, varietal, process, or roast?
Ooh, so the question is, what is the biggest like impact of flavor? Is it varietal, process, or roast? I put varietal pretty low down the list in terms of what is going to influence flavor. I think it takes a lot of work to train your palate to identify distinct differences in varietals. I think, gosh, it's kind of a toss-up for roast and processing, because if processing is really distinct, it will be immediately recognizable in the cup. Like a natural process is very loud and apparent, you know?
And across roast levels.
Yes, and across roast levels. But if the roast level is really aggressive, if there are two really different roast levels, then that will be the like easiest thing to tell.
For sure.
So I would say if roast level was a little bit closer, then like process would be pretty obvious. If the roast level was very, very different, might be hard to say, because if you do take a natural really dark, you can roast out some of that sweetness.
That's true.
Time to break. So we're going to do this real quick. That's a good question. I would say on top of that list, before any of those, would be origin. So where the coffee is from would be the strongest determining factor of how it will taste.
I got too excited. I was rocking the table and broke some of my
geez.
cups.
That's why we have our own tables. Cool. Oh my gosh. Hello from the Netherlands. Welcome.
Wow.
And
yeah.
Ohio, equally as exotic.
Welcome.
Can't leave out the guy from Canada.
In Canada.
Welcome,
of course.
Canada.
Our friends to the north. We hope to visit you soon.
Yeah, that's a good question. I was just muddling that over in my head too while we were breaking, and I was like, yeah, that is hard with like roast level versus. I like the roast level and origin. I feel like those are two very distinct things off the bat.
Well, you know, think about yourself as a coffee buyer, right? Like if you're in a cafe that has like a retail shelf, or if you're in a grocery store that has a really good selection of coffee, I think the first two things that customers are looking for, I think what we've sort of trained customers to look for, is roast level. So they're looking for distinct words on the package, like light, medium, dark, maybe bold, which is a word I really shy away from. And then country of origin. So they know, you know, oh, I like coffees from Peru, or I like coffees from Costa Rica. You know, one of the coffees I remember gravitating towards when I was really new to coffee was the Terroir from Trader Joe's. That was the first time I was like, oh, I know of a specific region in Costa Rica.
It's a good feeling.
It is a good feeling. But beyond that, I think, you know, it's a pretty big expectation of your customer to know the rest of that kind of like line by line information, which is sort of a reason in most cases, I really dissuade people. We talk a lot about what to include in your label and your packaging. And a lot of people will kind of take that full summary from the importer: elevation, harvest season, you know, how many hours it spent in the fermentation tank, how many hours it spent on raised beds, all of these different things. And they'll kind of throw all this info in the bag. my feeling is like, if our customers don't know how that's going to impact the cup, I don't know that it's very useful for them. And the last thing we want to do is like isolate people and make them feel like there's all this information here that they really can't access or really don't know why it's important, because that can feel really alienating. Yeah, that's kind of my like soapbox. We have more questions. Who's first?
How does origin influence flavor?
Oh, how does origin influence flavor? I think in every way. Yeah.
Terroir.
Terroir, right? We say this word terroir, we're borrowing that word from the wine industry. In winemaking, we know that specific grapes will taste a certain way, but more importantly, where those grapes have grown, the sunlight, the rainfall, the soil composition, the farming practices, all of that will influence the way that that bottle of wine tastes. And it's the same for coffee. I mean, even just think about fruits. If you're in North America, if you grew up on the West Coast versus the East Coast, you have different native berries. Your tomatoes probably taste different, like in harvest season. You have different types of apples, types of citrus, and even the same plant grown in two different places will have different characteristics. So origin is a very, very big influence on flavor.
It's wild.
It is wild.
I'm thinking we just got a Bolivia in that is a geisha.
Oh yeah.
And the idea of that being planted in Bolivia versus like getting a geisha varietal from
Ethiopia. Yeah. So like a geisha is a varietal of coffee plant that is related to the heirloom species. So sort of the first coffee plant, like the original, the Adam and Eve of the coffee plants. And so when we taste that Bolivia on the table, it cups out a lot like an Ethio. Like we cupped it last week. Bergamot, lavender, black tea, Earl Grey. These are notes that I associate with washed Yirgachefs very much. But there was like this undercurrent of like other sort of new flavors.
Like kind of like fudgy and like caramel and like blackberry. It was
things that we don't normally associate with Ethiopia, and that was that Bolivia origin coming in.
It's cool.
That coffee is going to be available on our website, both as a green and a roasted coffee. I guess that'll kind of replace the Brew Box in terms of like something to taste that we can share with you.
For sure.
Yeah. Do you have one?
I do.
Okay. We have our little MCs behind the cameras. Y'all can't see them, but they're doing the real work.
Elevation is often mentioned in descriptors. Why? Will latitude also have an impact?
So elevation is usually listed. Why do we include elevation in our coffee packaging, and does latitude influence as well? I'm going to say something about latitude, and I'm going to let you say something about elevation.
Perfect.
In general, the coffee band or the coffee belt is a kind of a narrow-ish band because the Coffea arabica plant likes to be close to the equator. So when we're talking about this type of coffee, specialty coffee, the way that this plant behaves is it grows at a specific latitude around the plant, the globe, the planet that we live on, in between the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn. So there is a little bit of diversity across those like latitudinal marks, but not a tremendous amount. We're not talking about coffee that's like growing all the way up here in the Midwest of the United States and then all the way down like at the very bottom of like Argentina. So bring that belt in a little bit closer. And so I would say that in that sense, latitude might not have as big of an impact. But for elevation, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, elevation, that can help us out with kind of getting a piece of information for as roasters. For like how hard is this bean going to be?
How dense,
or how much sugars are those seeds going to be? Because the higher the elevation, the longer for those sugars to develop. So in some origins, it's like that can just be high elevation, really wild, intense flavors from like Ethiopia, Kenya, some parts of like Costa Rica, some parts of Bolivia as well.
You have to think about like what stresses out a plant, right? What makes a plant work harder? Higher elevation, there's fewer nutrients, there's fewer resources available. There's more extreme swings in temperature.
More susceptible to disease.
Exactly.
As well.
And so those things make that plant really push to create sugars for energy, and that creates flavor. So when we see really high elevation coffees, 1900 meters above sea level, 2200 meters above sea level, for me, that expectation is like, wow, this is going to be vibrant, bright, maybe sweet, compare that to something at like 900 meters, down at our like lower elevation Brazils, and we're going to be anticipating probably a less complex coffee, more
Peanut.
malty, peanut,
Cocoa.
chocolate. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're going to do our first pass here since our coffees have cooled off a little bit. Very like fruit punch, juicy, like mouth watering. I get like almost like juice box.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking like very
Apple juice. Yeah.
citric
Yeah.
forward, like balanced lemonade.
Very balanced. Ooh. I like don't even want to spit that out. I just want to drink it. It's like baking spices. I get like a little of that like soft cinnamon, that like vanilla.
Yeah, I was thinking brown sugar cinnamon.
Yeah.
I just like go to like the brown sugar cinnamon Pop-Tart.
Yeah.
Where it's just kind of like a little bit of that like chewy brown sugar, but with that like pastry crust on it.
Buttery. Yeah.
And kind of like chewy too. Syrupy, very kind of lingering.
Cup 3, crisper, brighter, lighter, like a little bit more drying in the finish. It's like very clean. Almost like no like lingering aftertaste, just like really refreshing.
Has that like kind of tingle of like pineapple.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah. And it's almost like a little like resinous or like minty, that kind of like really clean, like, I don't know, we say breathy, which is like, it means it's like, you can kind of feel it like almost like a menthol. Yeah.
Kind of reminds me of like fresh garden spearmint or something. Not wintergreen spearmint.
That decaf is like really warm and inviting. Toasted wheat bread, honey nut Cheerios.
Oh yeah, that's a 7 p.m. fire sipper right there.
Decafs are so fun. It's interesting. The mountain water process, same with the Swiss water, is not going to add a lot of flavor. It's not going to influence, like change the final outcome a little bit. But I do recognize like a consistent like effect on the tactile.
Yeah.
Like the feeling of the coffee like changes a little bit because it's been decaffeinated. Not in a bad way, just in like a distinct like, oh yeah, I can kind of sense that.
Yeah.
Little like tackiness, little like graininess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like that's what's really cool about decafs is just like the tactile and sometimes a lot of times like the sweetness of it.
Yeah.
It's almost consistent.
Yeah.
Across methods.
Yeah.
Which is kind of sweet.
Before our second pass, any other good questions?
We have a question here from YouTube. How does roast profiling differ for decaf and regular coffee in terms of ease of development?
How does roast profiling differ for decafs, and how easy is it to develop, or spending time in the development phase? I'll let you interpret that however you wish. How do you roast decafs differently?
Yeah, so if you're already roasting, I'll start there. If you have a coffee that is washed, that you're roasting that you really love right now, you can almost kind of like imagine that as your decaf profile, but use it as your template, like your base, and then kind of keep everything the same up to green to yellow.
Yeah.
And then you start to stretch out the mid phase a little bit.
Yeah. Slow it down.
Yeah, because they've already been processed, they've already been worked a bit.
Yeah.
And this goes for kind of like Brazils as well,
Yeah.
and like naturals. Is that elongating that midsection of the roast, so maybe you're hitting first crack 20 seconds later.
Yeah.
And then your development, maybe I don't know, might be like 210 to start to your desired roast level.
Would that be like 20%?
I think about like 21%.
Yeah.
And if you want something that's really kind of like tactile and like really diminishing acidity, maybe 23%, 24%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that point is true, and it does also apply for naturals. Someone called yesterday at the office and just asked, what should I be doing differently? I'm about to roast a natural, and I was like, go a little slower, be coffees that have already sort of been through it.
Yeah.
They sort of experienced something, whereas these like, single estate, single varietal coffees that are just still very fresh and very like as they were when they came off the plant.
Yeah.
A little bit more resilient, can take high heat, can kind of take like a short development time, but we need to be gentle with anything that has like an additional step before they reach the consumer, or I guess the roaster.
Yeah. Remember, it's always good to kind of bracket that end too, where it's
Yeah.
like, well, try one at 18%, try one at 24%.
Yeah.
And then maybe
Cup
do
them out.
cup them out, and then maybe blend them together to do a little bit of a
Yeah.
wet blend to see if something in the middle is best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're going to do our second pass. We always like this. I'm not going to like tell everyone how to cup because I've done that on YouTube so many times, but we always try to taste these coffees as they cool down because they just change quite a bit. And, one of the things I wanted to talk about before we started was like, we've had this brew box on the website now for just a couple months. This was like our spring, summer offering. So I think it launched like maybe in May, maybe like late April.
Yeah.
And so, even these greens that are in our inventory, they have aged, like they have changed as well. So like this cupping is quite a bit different from like the first brew box cupping that we did because the coffee is like evolved a little bit.
Totally.
So I haven't even like looked at our descriptors. I'm going to look at those at the end. Yeah, that first cup is still just tasting so juicy, so lively, like nice medium weight body. I get like more of that citrus, kind of that pog, like pineapple, orange, grapefruit, nice guava.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
But it's like all like these yellow and golden and orange colors in my mind. A lot of like synesthesia, not unlike the colors that we've chosen here, which are more kind of pinky. Yeah. But I think that's kind of pog juice color.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is totally pog.
Yeah.
I get a lot of like golden raisin, like light caramel.
Yeah.
Definitely a lot brighter, but it feels very tactile mouthfeel.
The second cup is like almost sticky by comparison. Like where this feels like juicy and refreshing and like mouth-watering, this is like very coating and more like candied sweetness. Yeah. Yeah.
Even like maple or like peanut butter. Or you're just like still there.
It like really stays on your palate.
Yeah.
I think this is like the most savory of the coffees. This is the one that you said was like a little bit like herbaceous, or was that the second one?
I think so. I felt like the second one, I can't remember.
Yeah.
That's why you write things down.
I get like a little bit more like bay leaf and like other, I don't know, things that you wouldn't always associate with coffees, like getting away from that kind of classic like citrus fruit floral into like other kind of weirder notes here. There's like a lot of complexity.
There is kind of like a sweet peppercorn aspect about it.
Yeah, it reminds me of a soup.
Yeah. A little brothy.
Yeah, it's a little brothy.
It has a red wininess about it too, and like kind of like tea tannins.
And I'm back to like turtle brownie again on the decaf.
It's like through and through.
Yeah, very fudgy, very nutty, like really consistent, like from hot to cold, which is great. I always think of big swings in flavor as the coffee cools. Might not always be a great thing. Like it's nice to see a coffee like open up and kind of sort of show more quality and show more like flavors. But usually what happens is that as a coffee cools, it gets more sour, it gets more drying, more tart and like less enjoyable. And that is almost always a sign of something that's wrong with the roast profile, right? Like a roast issue that needs to be corrected, usually like a big difference between external and internal color, finished roast color. But this was like really tastes identical, hot and cold, which means like, roasted very well, very like consistent, very reliable. Yeah. Just like a decaf drinker. You always know always know how to make them happy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just have a decaf.
Just have a decaf and not have it suck and not have it be stale and not dialed in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's so many good ones out there.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Someone commented that it was interesting to hear a flavor note that was savory.
Oh yeah.
Do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. Someone just remarked that like a savory note was like sort of interesting to hear. Coffee is so complex. Yeah. I don't know what the number is. I'm sure I used to, in my barista classes, I used to say like 8,000 chemical compounds.
Right.
You know, whereas like something like wine might have like 3,000, and we use all types of interesting words like minerality and river rock and, you know, diesel like petrol and buttered popcorn and like all kinds of things to describe wines that are that people kind of take for granted, and those flavors are all here in coffee and then some. I wanted to, like before this session started, because we talked about these coffees in our previous live cupping, really talk about like how we build our sensory lexicon and our vocabulary for cupping.
Yeah.
And, you know, it really is about tasting a lot of things and tasting with a lot of intention and a lot of focus. We cup coffees every week in the roastery. We cup probably 20 coffees a week over the course of like 2 days, maybe like, you know, 3 days if we have a busy week, 4 days if we have class.
Right.
And that's a lot of coffees, but also then in our real lives outside of the coffee world, we're tasting a lot of other things and thinking constantly about those flavors and like building some of those like synapses to be like, what is that like note, or what does that remind me of, or how would I describe that to someone who wasn't eating or drinking this thing? And that like really like works out that muscle of like that specificity and description, which is so hard when you're new to cupping. I think the number one thing we hear from students over and over again is I can taste that flavor, but I can't think of the words, right? I can't describe it. And you really only get better at doing that with practice, but giving yourself permission to use words that are savory and words that are like maybe not pleasant, like what you wouldn't think of as being like high quality notes.
Totally.
I'm sure I said something just last week that I was like, oh, but not in a bad way, you know, wood shop.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like I have it somewhere.
Yeah. I said a coffee tasted kind of like a wood shop, but I meant like fresh cut lumber and like a little bit of like, you know, oils and leather and those types of, I think all of those like aromas are really nice.
Yeah.
So it doesn't always, but you have to kind of like let go of your inhibitions and be willing to say things that sound kind of silly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and sometimes too, I always go back to like nostalgia for like cupping.
Yeah.
So I'm always thinking about like places and colors. And I'm also thinking about like candies and sodas. Yeah.
Because you're kind of like a sugar head.
I was a huge sugar head. Yeah.
Cool. Drinking greener for roasting. Or drinking. What does that mean?
We like drinking
Do
coffee.
you have any recommendations on a good decaf?
Oh.
Where to start?
Yeah. Recommendations for good decaf. Well, pay attention to the processing method. There are a lot of different ways to decaffeinate coffee. Some are called direct method, which are pretty harsh, and some are called indirect method, which are quite a bit more gentle and leave the coffee tasting a little bit more close to the origin flavor. Water process, like mountain water or Swiss water, or the ethyl acetate, the EA process,
right?
Which is sometimes called
sugarcane process.
Sugarcane method, yeah. Those processing methods are going to be, take a little bit more of a gentle touch. They're more expensive, so you're paying a higher premium for a nicer tasting cup. Mm-hmm. Ethyl acetate processing is mostly done in Colombia. Yeah. So you can find a lot of Colombian coffees that are grown there and then processed at origin, which also helps maintain freshness. So if you're looking for a really like stunning, really nice decaf to start with, search for EA Colombias. If you want to kind of also taste, I think, do we have this? We have this decaf?
We do. We have
the website?
a little bit more of this decaf.
Yeah.
While supplies last. And then we will have an EA decaf green coming up here in a couple weeks.
Yeah.
How do you determine green coffee freshness, and is it important?
Is green coffee freshness important, and how do you know how fresh a coffee is?
Green coffee freshness is absolutely
very important. Yes.
But I will also say that green coffee that is too fresh, like just processed, will have this.
Not good.
It will have this like metallic kind of like taste to it. Green coffee needs to rest, so that shipping time to get here is great.
Yeah.
And then how can you tell? Typically in the cup, when we are cupping production roasts, when we are cupping samples, things that'll pop up are, we'll get a little bit of like a dryness about them. They might taste a little bit like the jute bag. that coffee comes in.
Yeah.
It can taste a little bit. I always like to say, for anybody that does the grocery shopping, when you get a paper bag and you're walking out and it's like raining on you a little bit,
Yeah.
you smell the bag and then you can kind of imagine like a little squeeze of lemon. And that's kind of like how I think about like aging coffee.
We use words like baggy or papery. Think of like wet newspaper, like smell. Those are flavors that are pretty reliable designators of old greens. Greens that are stale or greens that have just been around for too long. Also just dullness, flatness, like especially coffees like this, which we know are like really complex and really vibrant and have a lot of flavor. If we came to the table and we weren't getting those notes, we'd be like, man, these greens are really fading and it's really time to use them up and get them out of here and get something else. And another thing is if you're buying green coffee from an importer, or even from us, they should always be able to tell you when that green was harvested and whether or not it's fresh crop, meaning like it's the most recent crop that was harvested and not, last year's crop. Because green coffee in general, you want to be using it within 4 to 6 months. You don't want to hold on to it for a long time. Yeah. Cool.
On a more personal note, what do you guys on the weekends? How are you brewing your coffee?
Oh, how are we brewing coffee on the weekends? As quickly as I can.
That was a good question.
I'm just a really big fan of really, really good drip coffee. So I have a very nice brewer at my house that is like part of the SCA certified brewer program. So there's like a list of coffee makers on that website that are tested and rated. They're looking for really specific things like really strong heating elements that get the water all the way up to brewing temp, really good shower heads, really good distribution of water across the bed. And that is going to brew coffee to like the golden cup standard.
Yeah.
And so I use something like that at home with a high quality burr grinder and a digital scale to weigh out the right dose, the right ratio. And those three things make it pretty easy for anyone to make good coffee at home.
Yeah.
And then I go out for espresso because you should just go to a cafe for espresso drinks. Yeah.
I'm kind of in the same ballpark.
Yeah.
I have my little Bonavita 5-cup, which I do not believe they make anymore.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think we only make the 8-cup now.
R.I.P. Maya's got mine.
Yeah,
Now it's vintage.
Love that little 5-cup.
Yeah.
But yeah, if I really want to get into it, I'll do like an AeroPress.
Yeah.
But for the most part, just drip because both of us, my wife and I, drink a lot of coffee.
Yeah. I've got a shelf of manual brew equipment that I do not touch. Yeah.
Mine's a drawer, unorganized.
Yeah.
In the hutch.
Just things thrown in.
Yeah.
Okay, last question.
Okay.
What are you drinking? What are you excited about?
What are you drinking? What are you excited about?
I just ordered coffee today from a new roasting company called Relative. And I'm really excited for it to get here. And I think they just had their first roast date today. So that's what I'm getting. And I'm excited, and it's a blend. I hope it's good.
Let's see here. What am I? I'm really liking that Gesha from.
That Bolivia. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
it's kind of an easy answer.
It's kind of an easy answer, but I mean, other than that, I am really enjoying the Guatemala drip that we have in the office. It's the Adelan San Pedro from Kappa Imports.
And I did, because my parents were in town this weekend, I brought home a huge bag of that Guatemala because we were like a lot of people were drinking it, and it was really delicious. Yeah. Really solid.
Good job.
Guatemala turkey coffee to roast is what I'm told, but a lot of potential.
Give it a little more heat.
Yeah.
That's all you get for now.
Cool. Well, this has been super fun. We've really appreciated all these good questions. We really love to talk about coffee, about flavor, about sensory skills, and like sensory skill development. What you're watching here is very common for us to be doing as part of like our regular QC cupping, checking in on coffees that we know and that we're familiar with to make sure that they're still hitting these targets. If you're not cupping your coffees regularly, why not? Start doing that. This should be part of your weekly protocol. If you're roasting, or if you're trying to learn more about coffee, or if you're trying to sell coffee, this should be a habit that you're in really consistently so that you're really getting a huge, like a big picture of what these coffees like taste and smell like so that you can talk about them with other people. And if you cup with friends or with other people in your organization, you get really calibrated and you can see, even just casually that like Bryant and I are experiencing a lot of similar notes, and that's because we cup together all the time. So we've learned each other's vocabularies, and that calibration makes it easier to, know when a coffee is working or not working. We both kind of have a sense of like what the best coffee is on the table, and it makes it easier to develop new profiles and buy new greens, and do stuff like this.
Right.
So if you want to cup with us, come to class, Roasting 101. We teach it every month. We cup in that class. We talk a ton about flavor. And if you're interested in trying out something else that we've roasted, that we provide a lot of flavor descriptors on, look at our website. We have a section for roasted coffee, and we will get that Bolivia up there soon. So if you're watching in the summer of 2023, you're in luck.
Nice.
Otherwise, sorry for you.
Yeah.
Thanks for hanging out. We'll see you online or here in Minneapolis.
Woo.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.